villagers of Garmin met the next day. There was less talking this time. As Harley looked out over them, he thought some of them seemed resigned, almost as if the third bear were a plague or some other force that could not be controlled or stopped by the hand of man. In the days that followed, there would be a frenzy of action. Traps set, torches lit, poisoned meat left in the forest, but none of it came to anything. One old woman kept muttering about fate and the will of God. John was a good man, Harley told them. He did not deserve his death, but I was there. I saw his wounds. He died from an animal attack. It may be a clever animal. It may be very clever, but it is still an animal. We should not fear it the way we fear it. Harley said this, even though he did not believe it. You should consult with the witch in the woods, Clem's son said. Clem's son was a huge man of 20 years, and his word held weight, given the bravery of his father. Several people began to nod in agreement. Yes, said one, go to the witch. She might know what to do. The witch in the woods is just a poor adult woman, Harley thought, but could not say it. Just 2 months ago, Harley reminded them, you were saying she might have made this happen. And if so, what of it? If she caused it, she can undo it. If not, perhaps she can help us. This from one of the farmers displaced from outside the walls. Word of John's fate had spread quickly, and less than a handful of the bravest or most foolhardy had kept to their farms. Rancor spread amongst the gathered villagers. Some wanted to take a party of men out to the witch, wherever she might live, and kill her. Others thought, this is folly. What if the third bear found them first? Finally, Harley raised his hands to silence them. Enough. If you want me to go to the witch in the woods, I will go to her. The relief on their faces as he looked out at them. The relief that it was he who would take the risk and not them. It was like a balm that cleansed their worries, if only for the moment. Some fools were even smiling. Later, Harley lay in bed with his wife. He held her tight, taking comfort in the warmth of her body. What can I do? What can I do, Rebecca? I'm scared. I know you are. Do you think I'm not scared as well? But neither of us can show it, or they will panic. And once they panic, Garmin is lost. But what do I do? Go see the witch woman, my love. If you go to her, it will make them calmer. And if you can tell them whatever you like, and you can tell them whatever you like about what she says. If the third bear doesn't kill me before I can find her. If she isn't already dead. In the deep woods, in a silence so profound that the ringing in his ears had become the roar of a river, Harley looked for the witch woman. He knew that she had been exiled to the southern part of the forest, and so he had started there and worked his way toward the center. What he was looking for, he did not know. A cottage? A tent? What he would do when he found her, Harley didn't know either. His spear, his incomplete armor, these things would not protect him if she truly was a witch. He tried to keep the vision of the terrible winter in his head as he walked, because concentrating on that more distant fear removed the current fear. If not for me, the third bear might not be here, Harley had said to Rebecca before he left. It was Harley who had stopped them from burning the witch, had insisted only on exile. That's nonsense, Rebecca had replied. Remember that she's just an old woman living in the woods. Remember that she can do you no real harm. It had been as if she'd read his thoughts, but now, breathing in the thick air of the forest, Harley felt sure about the witch woman. It was true there had been sickness in the village until they had cast her out. Harley tried to focus on the spring of loam beneath his boots, the clean, dark smell of the bark and earth and air. After a time, he crossed a dirt-choked stream. As if this served as a dividing line, the forest became yet darker. The sounds of wrens and finches died away. Above, he could see the distant dark shapes of hawks in the treetops, and patches of light shining down that almost looked more like bog or marsh water, so disoriented he had become. It was in this deep forest that he found a door. Harley had stopped to catch his breath after cresting a slight incline. Hands on his thighs, he looked up, and there it stood, a door, in the middle of the forest. It was made of old oak and overgrown with moss and mushrooms, and yet it seemed to flicker like glass. A kind of light or brightness hurtled through the ground, through the dead leaves and worms and beetles around the door. It was a subtle thing, and Harley half thought he was imagining it at first. He straightened up, grip tightening on his spear. The door stood by itself. Nothing human-made surrounded it, not even the slightest ruin of a wall. Harley walked closer. The knob was made of brass or some other yellowing metal. He walked around the door. It stood firmly wedged into the ground. The back of the door was the same as the front. Harley knew that if this was the entrance to the old woman's home, then she was indeed a witch. His hand remained steady, but his heart quickened, and he thought furiously of winter, of icicles and bitter cold and snow falling slowly forever. For several minutes he circled the door, deciding what to do. For a minute more he stood in front of the door, pondering. A door always needs opening, he thought finally. He grasped the knob and pushed, and the door opened. Some events have their own sense of time and their own logic. Harley knew this just from the change of seasons every year. He knew this from the growing of the crops and the birthing of children. He knew it from the forest itself and the cycles it went through, that often seemed incomprehensible and yet had their own pattern, their own calendar. From the first thawed trickle of stream water in the spring to the last hopping frog in the fall, the world held 1,000 mysteries. No man could hope to know the truth of them all. When the door opened, and he stood in a room very much like the room one might find in a woodman's cottage, with a fireplace and a rug and a shelf and pots and pans on the wood walls and a rocking chair. When this happened, Harley decided in the time it took him to blink twice that he had no need for the why of it or the how of it, even. And this was, he realized later, the only reason he kept his wits about him. The witch woman sat in the rocking chair. She looked older than Harley remembered, as if much more than a year had passed since he had last seen her. Seeming made of ash and soot, her black dress lay flat against her sagging skin. She was blind, eye sockets bare, but her wrinkled face strained to look at him anyway. There was a buzzing sound. "I remember you," she said. Her voice was croak and whisper both. Her arms were mottled with age spots, her hands so thin and queer-looking that they could have been talons. She gripped the arms of the rocking chair as if holding onto the world. There was a buzzing sound. It came, Harley finally realized, from a halo of black hornets that circled the old woman's head, their wings beating so fast they could hardly be seen. "Are you Haskat, who used to live in Gromin?" Harley asked. "I remember you," the witch woman said again. "I'm the elder of the village of Gromin." The woman spat to the side. "Those that threw poor Haskat out. They would have done much worse if I'd let them. They'd have burned me if they could, and all I knew then were a few charms, a few herbs, just because I wasn't one of them, just because I'd seen a bit of the world." Haskat was staring right at him, and Harley knew that, eyes or no eyes, she could see him. "It was wrong," Harley said. "It was wrong," she said. "I had nothing to do with the sickness. Sickness comes from animals, from people's clothes. It clings to them and spreads through them." "And yet you are a witch." Haskat laughed, although it ended with coughing. "Because I had a hidden room? Because my door stands by itself?" Harley grew impatient. "Would you help us if you could? Would you help us if we let you return to the village?" Haskat straightened up in the chair, and the hail of hornets disintegrated, then reformed. The wood in the fireplace popped and crackled. Harley felt a chill in the air. "Help you return to the village?" She spoke as if chewing her tongue, a fat grey grub. "A creature is attacking and killing us." Haskat laughed. When she laughed, Harley could see a strange double image in her face, a younger woman beneath the older. "Is that so? What kind of creature?" "We call it the third bear. I do not believe it is really a bear." Haskat doubled over in mirth. "Not really a bear that is not a bear. We cannot seem to kill it. We thought that we might know how to defeat it." "Stage to the forest," the witch woman said. It stays to the forest and it is a bear, but not a bear. It kills your people when they use the forest path. It kills your people in the farms. It even sneaks into your graveyards and takes the head of your dead. You're full of fear and panic. You cannot kill it, but it keeps murdering you in the most terrible of ways. And that was Winter coming from her dry, stained lips. Do you know of it? Harley asked, his heart fast now from hope, not fear. Ah, yes, I know it, Haskat said, nodding. I know the third bear, the bear, Seether. After all, I brought it here. The spear moved in Harley's hand, and it would have driven itself deep into the woman's chest if Harley had let it. For revenge? Harley asked. Because we drove you out of the village? Haskat nodded. Unfair. It was unfair. You should not have done it. You're right, Harley thought. I should have let them burn you. You're right, Harley said. We should not have done it, but we have learned our lesson. I was once a woman of knowledge and learning, Haskat said. Once I had a real cottage in a village. Now I'm old, and the forest is cold and uncomfortable. All of this is illusion. And she gestured at the fireplace at the walls of the cottage. There is no cottage, no fireplace, no rocking chair. Right now, we are both dreaming beneath dead leaves among the worms and the beetles and the dirt. My back is sore and patterned by leaves. There's no place for someone as old as me. I'm sorry, Harley said. You can come back to the village. You can live among us. We'll pay for your food. We'll give you a house to live in. Haskat frowned. And some logs. I'll warrant. Some logs and some rope and some fire to go with it, too. Harley took off his helmet, stared into Haskat's eye sockets. I promise you whatever you want. No harm will come to you if you'll help us. A man has to realize when he's beaten and he's done wrong. You can have whatever you want, on my honor. Haskat brushed at the harness ring in her head. Nothing is that easy. Isn't it? I brought it from a place far distant. In my anger, I sat in the middle of the forest despairing, and I called for it from across the miles, across the years. I never expected it would come to me. So you can send it back. Haskat frowned, spat again and shook her head. No, I hardly remember how I called it, and someday it may even be my head it takes. Sometimes it is easier to summon something than to send it away. You cannot help us at all? If I could, I might, but calling it weakened me. It is all I can do to survive. I dig for toads and eat them raw. I wander the woods searching for mushrooms. I talk to the deer and I talk to the squirrels. Sometimes the birds tell me things about where they've been. Someday I will die out here, all by myself, completely mad. Harley's frustration heightened. He could feel the calm he had managed to keep leaving him. The spear twitched and jerked in his hand. What if he killed her? He might. Might that send the third bear back where it had come from? What can you tell me about the third bear? Can you tell me anything that might help me? Haskat shrugged. It acts as to its nature, and it is far from home, so it clings to ritual even more. Where it is from, it is no more or less bloodthirsty than any other creature, but this is far from home. It appears more horrible than it is. It is merely making a pattern. When the pattern is finished, it will leave and go someplace else. Maybe the pattern will even help send it home. A pattern of heads? Yes, a pattern with heads. Do you know when it will be finished? No. Do you know where it lives? Yes, it lives here. In his mind, he saw a hill, he saw a cave, he saw the third bear. Do you know anything else? No. Haskat grinned up at him. He drove the spear through her dry chest. There was a sound like twigs breaking. Harley woke covered in leaves. In the dirt, his body curled up next to the old woman. He jumped to his feet, picking up his spear. The old woman, dressed in a black dress and dirty shawl, was dreaming and mumbling in her sleep. Dead Harlots had become entangled in her stringy hair. She clutched a dead toad in her left hand. A smell came from her, of rot, of shit. There was no sign of the door. The forest was silent and dark. Harley almost drove the spear into her chest again, but she was tiny, like a bird, and defenseless, and staring down at her could not do it. At her, he could not do it. He looked around at the trees, at the fading lights. It was time to accept that there was no reason to it, no why. It was time to go out one way or another. A pattern of heads, he muttered to himself all the way home. A pattern of heads. Harley did not remember much about the meeting with the villagers upon his return. They wanted to hear about a powerful witch who could help or curse them, some force greater than themselves. some glint of hope through the trees, a light in the dark. He could not give it to them. He told them the truth as much as he dared, but also hinted that the witch had told him how to defeat the third bear. Did it do much good? He didn't know. He could still see winter before them. He could still see blood, and they'd brought it on themselves. That was the part he didn't tell them, that a poor old woman with the ground for a bed and dead leaves for a blanket thought she had, through her anger, brought the third bear down upon them. The bear, Cedar. You must leave, he told Rebecca later. Take a wagon, take a mule, load it with supplies. Don't let yourself be seen. Take our 2 sons. Bring that young man who helps chop firewood for us, if you can trust him. Rebecca stiffened beside him. She was quiet for a very long time. Where will you be? She asked. Harley was 47 years old. He had lived in Goblin his entire life. I have one thing left to do, and then I will join you. I know you will, my love, Rebecca said, holding on to him tightly, rounding her hands across his body, as if as blind as the old witch woman, remembering. They both knew there was only one way Harley could be sure Rebecca and his sons made it out of the forest safely. Harley started from the south, just upwind from where Rebecca had set out along an old cart trail, and curled in toward the third bear's home. After a long trek, Harley came to a hill that might have been a cairn made up by his ancestors. A stream flowed down it and puddled at its feet. The stream was red and carried with it gristle and bits of marrow. It smelled like black pudding frying. The blood mixed with the deep green of the moss and turned it purple. Harley watched the blood ripple at the edges of his boots for a moment, and then he slowly walked up the hill. He'd been carelessly loud for a long time as he walked through the leaves. About this time, Rebecca would be more than halfway through the woods, he knew. In the cave, surrounded by all that Clem had seen and more, Harley disturbed the bear at his work. Harley's spear had long since slipped through numb fingers. He'd pulled off his helmet because it itched and because he was sweating so much. He'd had to rip his tunic and hold the cloth against his mouth. Harley had not meant to have a conversation. He meant to try to kill the beast. But now that he was there, now that he saw, all he had left were words. Harley's boot crunched against half-soggy bone. The bear didn't flinch. The bear already knew. The bear kept licking the fluid out of the skull in his hairy hand. The bear did look a little like a bear. Harley could see that, but no bear was that tall or that wide, or looked as much like a man as a beast. The ring of heads lined every flat space in the cave, painted blue and green and yellow and red and white and black. Even in the extremity of his situation, Harley could not deny that there was something beautiful about the pattern. This painting, Harley began in a thin, stretched voice. These heads, how many do you need? The bear turned its bloodshot, curious gaze on Harley, body swiveling as if made of air, not muscle and bone. How do you know not to be afraid? Harley asked, shaking, piss running down his leg. Is it true you come from a long way away? Are you homesick? Somehow, not knowing the answers to so many questions made Harley's heart sore for the many other things he would never know, never understand. The bear approached. It stank of mud and offal and rain. It made a continual sound like the rumble of thunder mixed with a cat's purr. It had paws, but it had thumbs. Harley stared up into its eyes. The two of them stood there, silent, for a long moment. Harley trying with everything he had to read some comprehension, some understanding into that face, those eyes, oddly gentle, the muzzle wet with carrion. We needed to leave. We needed to go somewhere else. Please. Harley could see Hasgat's door in the forest in front of him. It was opening in a swirl of dead leaves. A light was coming from inside of it, a light from very, very far away. The bear held Harley against his chest. Harley could hear the beating of its mighty heart, as loud as the world. Rebecca and his sons would be almost past the forest by now. Cedar tore Harley's head from his body, let the rest crumple to the ground, to the dirt floor. Harley's body lay there for a good long while. Winter came, as brutal as it had ever been, and the third bear continued in its work. With Harley gone, the villagers became ever more listless. Some few disappeared into the forest and were never heard from again. Others feared the forest so much that they ate berries and branches at the outskirts of their homes and never hunted wild game. Their supplies gave out. Their skin became even more pale and they stopped washing themselves. They believed the words of madmen and adopted strange customs. They stopped wearing clothes. They would have relations in the street. At some point, they lost sight of reason entirely and sacrificed virgins to the third bear, who took them as willingly as anyone else. They took to mutilating their bodies, thinking that this is what the third bear wanted them to do. Some few in whom reason persisted had to be held down and mutilated by others. A few cannibalized those who froze to death, and others who had not died almost wished they had. No relief came. The Baron never brought his men. Spring came, finally, and the streams thawed. The birds came back, the trees regained their leaves, and the frogs began to sing their mating songs. In the deep forest, an old wooden door lay half buried in moss and dirt, leading nowhere, all light fading from it. And on an overgrown hill, there lay an empty cave with nothing but a few dead leaves and a few bones littering the dirt floor. The third bear had finished its pattern and moved on, but for the remaining villagers, he would always be there.